The leaders trying to find some common ground with U.S.-China relations at an all-time low. We have team coverage from all angles. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is standing by, but we begin with White House correspondent Peter Doocy. He is in Bali, Indonesia. It must have been hot there, Peter, because I noticed you just put your jacket back on.
Dana, it's not the heat, it's the humidity, as I'm trying to just communicate to everybody here. But it feels like this event is getting close. We do have the official readout from the White House, and there are two words that are missing, two topics that are missing from this first draft of history, really. COVID not being advertised as a topic of discussion today, and neither is fentanyl. And the reason both of those things to be relevant, of course, fentanyl's ingredients come from China, and COVID is something China misled the world about from the outset. The closest this readout gets to talking about that is health security. President Biden decided not to mention either of those in this first in-person meeting as president. Here's what they did talk about, though, candidly, according to the White House. Climate change, China's non-market economic practices, they say, hurt U.S. families, and Taiwan. President Biden, we are told, objected to Taiwan's recent aggression towards Taiwan. He also did object to China's human rights practices, and we're told President Biden and Xi did agree a nuclear war must be avoided, which in the long term may wind up being the biggest headline from this first summit of superpowers during Biden's administration. In the Chinese version of how things went down, the Chinese officials are saying this: the current situation facing China-U.S. relations is not in line with the fundamental interests of the two countries and the two peoples, nor is it in line with the expectations of the international community. We expect to hear President Biden elaborate on all of that, and we just are hearing now there's a 2-minute warning to the president. So we will take a seat and review our questions and wait.
Well, you know what? It's Bill Hemmer's birthday. Thank you, Peter. We'll be watching. And we're going to bring in Mike Pompeo. He's the former Secretary of State. He's going to be watching this with us. But you guessed it was going to be 9:05 when the president came out. I went with 9:18. Okay. And you are the lucky winner.
Well,
this morning.
Closest without going over, I guess.
Yes.
In the 90 seconds we have to fill, Secretary Pompeo, thank you for your time today. What would be your expectation from a meeting such as this, when so much of this has been predetermined in terms of language prior to? What happened over the past 3 hours one-on-one?
Well, good morning. It would be my hope that the president would have laid out not only his view, his vision, but the concrete actions that the United States is prepared to take. The Chinese Communist Party is very good about talking. They think talking is a win for them. What I hope President Biden laid out are these are the concrete measures the United States is prepared to take on fentanyl to protect people here at home, inside our schools and universities to make sure Chinese espionage isn't conducted here, protecting the Uyghurs in the West, building out a military footprint in the region to secure it. Those are the things I hope he would have laid out.
Podium. Let's go to him first.
Good
Thank you.
Please. Good evening, everyone. Let me start with a few words about the recent elections held in the United States. What we saw was the strength and resilience of the American democracy, and we saw it in action. And the American people proved once again that democracy is who we are. And there was a strong rejection of election deniers at every level, from those seeking to lead our states and those seeking to serve in Congress, and also those seeking to oversee the elections. And there was a strong rejection of political violence and voter intimidation. There was an emphatic statement that in America, the will of the people prevails. I've traveled this week, and it's been clear just how closely the world and our allies and our competitors as well have been following our elections at home. Excuse me, I have a little cold. And what these elections showed is that there's a deep and unwavering commitment in America to preserving and protecting and defending democracy. Now, let me speak briefly about our agenda over the past few days in Egypt and in Cambodia and here in Indonesia. In this moment of great global challenges, from global inflation to the climate crisis to Russia's brutal war against Ukraine, we're bringing together the broadest possible coalition of partners to deliver results. At COP27 in Egypt, I made it clear that thanks to the bold agenda of our administration, we pursue from day one to tackle the climate crisis and advance energy and security at home and around the world. The United States will meet our emissions targets under the Paris Agreement. And we're going to keep working with our partners to support the most vulnerable countries in building resilience to climate impacts and to align global ambition with the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal while supercharging our clean energy transition. At the U.S.-ASEAN Summit and the East Asia Summit, I laid out a commitment to working with our partners in the Indo-Pacific to ensure a future that's vital to this region, that's free and open and prosperous as well as secure. And I met with our allies from Australia, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, underscoring our commitment and deepening our engagement with our closest partners and strengthening cooperation among our allies to meet shared threats to our own security and to their security, including the DPRK. And let me meet, I just met in person with Xi Jinping of the People's Republic of China. We had, we had an open and candid conversation about our intentions and our priorities. It was clear, he was clear and I was clear, that we'll defend American interests and values, promote universal human rights, and stand up for the international order and work in lockstep with our allies and partners. We're going to compete vigorously, but I'm not looking for conflict. I'm looking to manage this competition responsibly. And I want to make sure that every country abides by the international rules of the road. And we discussed that. The One China policy, our One China policy has not changed, We oppose unilateral change in the status quo by either side, and we're committed to maintaining the peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. It was also clear that China and the United States should be able to work together where we can to solve global challenges that require every nation to do its part. We discussed Russia's aggression against Ukraine, reaffirmed our shared belief in the threat or the use of nuclear weapons is totally unacceptable, and I asked that Secretary Blinken travel to China to follow up on our discussions and continue keeping the lines of communication open between our two countries. Looking ahead at the G20 meetings tomorrow, we're going to be taking on the very issues that matter to the people's lives, not only here, but also our allies and our partners. That means tackling the suffering that Russian aggression has unleashed, not just in Ukraine people, but the people around the world, particularly food insecurity, and strengthening the fundamentals of our global economy for everyone. Support for debt relief, reforms for multilateral development banks, investments to bolster global health security, and to make sure the world is better prepared for the next pandemic. The G20 has been an important forum for the world's largest economies to work together for the good of people everywhere. And I'm looking forward to our meetings tomorrow. Now let me close with this. On my first trip overseas last year, I said that America was back. Back at home, back at the table, and back to leading the world. In the year and a half that's followed, we've shown exactly what that means. America is keeping its commitments. America is investing in our strength at home. America is working alongside our allies and partners to deliver real, meaningful progress around the world. And at this critical moment, no nation is better positioned to help build the future we want than the United States of America. Now, I'm happy to take questions, and I'm told there are going to be 4 questioners, but I'm not going to do 10 questions from each questioner. All right? Let's just make that clear at the outset here. And Ken Thomas, Wall Street Journal.
You said at the outset of this meeting that you did not want competition to turn into conflict. Based on this meeting today, do you believe a new Cold War with China can be avoided? And specifically on the issue of Taiwan, you spoke about intentions. Do you believe China is intending to invade Taiwan at some point? And what warnings did you issue to President Xi if he were to take such action?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I absolutely believe there need not be a new Cold War. I've met many times with Xi Jinping, and we were candid and clear with one another across the board. And I do not think there's any imminent attempt on the part of China to invade Taiwan. And I made it clear that our policy on Taiwan has not changed at all. It's the same exact position we've had. I made it clear that we want to see cross-strait issues peacefully resolved. And And so it never has to come to that. And I'm convinced that that he understood exactly what I was saying. I understood what he was saying. And look, I think the United States is better prepared than any country in the world, economically and politically, to deal with the changing circumstances around the world. And I think that I think Xi Jinping is. We agreed that we would set up a set of circumstances where, on issues that we had to further resolve details, we agreed that we would have our chief of staff, the appropriate cabinet members and others sit and meet with one another to discuss the details of every issue that was raised, and we raised a lot of issues. Sung Kim, Associated Press.
Mr. President, you met with President Xi, and you met with him face-to-face after he had unquestionably consolidated his power at home. So now that you've met with him face-to-face, how do you assess his sort of posture towards the United States now? And did you find him personally to be more confrontational or more conciliatory and willing to compromise?
Neither and yes. Yes, I didn't find him more confrontational or more conciliatory. I found him the way he's always been, direct and straightforward. And do I think he's willing to compromise on various issues? Yes. I think he understands that. Look, I think, how can I say this tactfully? I think the election held in the United States, which still leaves a little bit uncertain, has sent a very strong message around the world that the United States is ready to play. The United States is, the Republicans who survived, along with the Democrats, are of the view that we're going to stay fully engaged in the world and that we, in fact, know what we're about. And so I don't get any sense that there's more or less confrontation. We were very blunt with one another about places where we disagreed or where we were uncertain of each other's position, and we agreed we'd set up, and we did, mechanisms whereby we would meet in detail with the key people in each of our administrations to discuss how we could resolve them, or how, if they weren't resolved, on what basis were they not resolved. Sebastian Smith, the AFP.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's extremely close. Excuse me, I don't usually talk that loudly. Does the retaking of Kherson in Ukraine signal a turning point in the war, in your opinion? That the Ukrainians could realistically pursue their ultimate goal of expelling the Russians completely, including retaking Crimea? If so, does the US intend to support and facilitate that goal, as you've been doing so far with their other goals? Or would you perhaps see Kherson as a different kind of inflection point, basically a good time to start negotiating now that they've got some more strength than they had a few weeks ago?
First of all, it was a significant victory for Ukraine. Significant victory. And I can do nothing but applaud the courage, determination, and capacity of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian military. I mean, they have really been amazing. And I think it's hard to tell at this point exactly what it means in terms of, but I've been very clear that we're going to continue to provide the capability for the Ukrainian people to defend themselves, and we are not going to engage in any negotiation. There's nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. It's a decision Ukraine has to make. I think you're going to see things slow down a bit because of the winter months and the inability to move as easily around the country. But I think it remains to be seen exactly what the outcome will be, except that I'm confident that Russia will not occupy or defend Ukraine as they intended from the beginning. I have trouble reading this. Reuters, Natanja Bose.
President, quick question on North Korea. which appears poised to conduct a new nuclear test. I'm wondering if you can talk about your specific discussions with President Xi on that. To what extent do you think China has the ability to talk North Korea out of conducting such tests? And what are the repercussions for U.S.-Chinese relations if a test goes forward?
Well, first of all, it's difficult to say that I am certain that China can control North Korea, number one. Number two, I made it clear to President Xi Jinping that I thought they had an obligation to attempt to make it clear to North Korea that they should not engage in long-range nuclear tests. And I made it clear as well that if they did, they, meaning North Korea, that we would have to take certain actions that would be more defensive on our behalf, and it would not be directed against North Korea. It would not be directed against China, but it would be to send a clear message to North Korea. We are going to defend our allies as well as American soil and American capacity. And so, but I do not think that it's difficult to determine whether or not China has the capacity. I'm confident China is not looking for North Korea to engage in further escalatory means, because I made it clear, and I made it clear from the very beginning and last year as well, that we will do what it needs to defend our capacity, to defend ourselves and our allies, South Korea as well as Japan, and that we'd be more up in the face of China, but it wouldn't be because of China. It'd be because of what was going on in North Korea. So, again, on a number of these issues, we have put together teams where our National Security Advisor, Secretary of Defense, and others are going to be engaging with their counterparts from China to see, and we're not going to be able to work everything out. I'm not suggesting this is kumbaya, everybody is going to go away with everything in agreement. But I do not believe there's a need for concern of as one of you raised the legitimate question, a new Cold War. And I think that I'll conclude by saying it this way. I want to be clear, and be clear with all leaders, but particularly with Xi Jinping, that I mean what I say and I say what I mean. So there's no misunderstanding. That's the biggest concern I have is a misunderstanding about intentions or actions on each of our parts. So we went into, I look at my team, how long did that meeting last? 3.5 hours. So we covered an awful lot of territory. And I must say that he was as straightforward as he has been with me in the past. And I think that we understand one another, which is the most important thing that can be done. I guess all of you are going swimming from here. It's not far. But
Mr. President, what should Americans expect from Congress as it relates to abortion rights after the midterms?
I don't think they can expect much of anything other than we're going to maintain our positions. I'm not going to get into more questions. I shouldn't even answer your question. No, I don't think that. I don't think there's enough votes to codify unless something happens unusual in the House. I think we're going to get very close in the House, but I think it's going to be very close, but I don't think we're going to make it.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, just about 4 different reporters. What do you think? About a half dozen questions there, Dana. They covered Taiwan and Xi, midterm elections, Ukraine, and North Korea. A lot to get to from those.
A lot to get to. I mean, a lot of things that didn't come up, at least in the questions. He only took 4 questions. I thought he could have taken more because he was having a pretty strong press conference. But we didn't get a chance to hear him if he talked to Xi about COVID. Or about the fentanyl that's coming into the United States, or even about China building a coal-fired power plant a week, when he just said earlier that the United States is going to meet its emissions reductions targets as laid out in the Paris Agreement.
So let's get to Mike Pompeo, who's been standing by here. Sir, your headline, what did you hear from that?
Well, 2 things. One, he seemed a little confused and perhaps tired. It's been a long trip. I completely get that. I've been there before, too. but I hope he didn't leave an impression of weakness in the mind of Xi Jinping, who would have been very capable in that meeting. Second, he said something on Taiwan, right? He started with the comment that we haven't changed our policy with respect to one China, yet we all know President Biden multiple times has made statements that are in direct contradiction of what he just said. So he said Xi understands him. I couldn't tell you what our Taiwan policy is today, and that is incredibly important. And finally, and Dana, you hit on this, while they're sitting in the meeting, the Chinese Communist Party is building out islands in the Pacific and building coal-fired power plants, and our biggest problem with them seems to be climate change, according to President Biden. That's a big mistake. Xi Jinping will read this as American weakness, and the idea that we're just going to have more talks and more discussions seems to me ill-founded. What we really need are actions, not just more words and more meetings.
He said that we want to stay, Biden said, I intend to stay competitive, but not have confrontation with China. I don't know if that's possible. And even at the end, the president said, look, he's not saying it was a kumbaya meeting in any way. And we'll wait to see what the Chinese say about it. Not sure if we can believe any of that. But is that possible to compete with China vigorously, but without confrontation?
Dana, this confrontation is already underway. It has been for the past decade. They have built their economy in China on the back of the American worker. They're inside the gates here at home conducting espionage. They're inside our university systems and our research centers. So for a president to say, well, gosh, I hope we don't have confrontation, I think fundamentally misunderstands the threat of the Chinese Communist Party and what it presents to ordinary workers, people all across our country. This idea that there's a Cold War, not a Cold War, those are just words. The Chinese Communist Party has deep intentions. She has now a virtually lifetime lock on power. And his idea of a world that looks more like theirs and less like ours is one that we have to confront in every dimension: economic, military, diplomatic, political, each of them.
Meanwhile, the war in Ukraine, it's a big topic in these discussions, a big victory of sorts for the time being in that southern city of Kherson. The president called a significant victory. However, at the same time, and these reports have been out there for about 2 weeks, but here it is on record, senior White House official involved in undisclosed talks with top Putin aides. Jake Sullivan had confidential discussions with Russian counterparts amid concerns over escalation and nuclear threats. What the president seemed to say a moment ago is that there will be no negotiations without Ukraine. I got a little mumbled in there, but that's what I think I heard. How can you enlighten us on what these talks could be about?
Bill, that's what I think I heard too. Look, I hope these conversations, private conversations with National Security Advisor Sullivan, are very direct. Direct about the things we would do if Vladimir Putin does something crazy like use a nuclear weapon or go after the plant in Zaporizhia or other kinds of things which would raise and escalate. I hope we've been very clear about how the United States will respond and how costly it will be to the Russians. And then I hope they are beginning to chart a path forward and what this will look like. This will ultimately be President Zelensky who makes these decisions, and I hope the Americans, when they spoke with Putin, made that clear to him as well.
He also talked, he got a question about North Korea and the concern that there's a new nuclear test being readied by North Korea. And he was asked, can China play the role that it needs to play in the region in order to prevent North Korea from using a nuclear weapon? And the president said that, it's not certain that China can control North Korea. Anything on that come to mind?
Yeah, Dana, I was listening very closely to that. I'm not sure I understood exactly what President Biden said there. Our experience was that the Chinese Communist Party has the capacity, near perfect, to direct the activities of the DPRK, Chairman Kim. Very, very close, very connected. They rely upon China for food security. They've relied on them throughout the COVID crisis. The Chinese Communist Party should not be let off the hook. If the North Koreans conduct a nuclear test, the Chinese Communist Party must respond in a way that is serious and meaningful. And they have every capacity to do it. To give them a free pass and say, gosh, they just can't control what goes on in North Korea is false.
I feel like I should make a clarification just to make sure that he said it is difficult to say that I am certain that China can control North Korea, number one. Number two, he says he made it clear that Xi Jinping has a role to play here to do whatever they can.
On that point, you were with the North Korean delegation in Hanoi. You were with them in Singapore. Well, what did you tell the North Koreans about what you felt the influence of Beijing was then and now?
Yeah, Bill, that's a great question. We had lots of conversations about this. I was in Pyongyang with Chairman Kim as well on multiple occasions. We made clear that we understood that they were under the jackboot of the Chinese Communist Party, that made things very difficult for Chairman Kim when he wanted to be closer to the United States, in the sense of he wanted to listen to President Trump and consider whether there was a path forward towards full and final denuclearization there. Chairman Kim's in a tough place, and that's why we always made sure that the Chinese Communist Party understood that we were serious about what we were doing, and we understood that they were, while not in perfect control of what took place in North Korea, enormously influential there on sanctions, coal, moving in and out of the country, energy, all the things that really matter to Chairman Kim. The Chinese Communist Party has the capacity to control.
All right. No better guest to have than Secretary Pompeo this morning. Thank you for listening to that press conference with us.
We'll speak
Bill,
again.
Dana, thank you.
You bet. Thanks for being here today. So we'll chew on this a little bit for the next couple of hours and see where it leads and get more reaction.
And we'll get the Chinese reaction as well.
Yeah, and this whole thing about the North Korea, what was the answer? We're looking through the transcript here. We'll parse the words and interpret them as best we can, shall we, Ms. Perino? In the meantime, there's a manhunt underway in Virginia. There was a deadly killing, the shooting at the university. We are live on campus to find out where the manhunt is leading police now. Dana?
Plus, Republicans win some key House seats over the weekend, but the battle for the majority, you guys, it is still not over. We'll go to the touchscreen and talk to Josh Kroshar as well.
Also, Elon Musk says he's got too much on his plate after buying Twitter. What the future for him is looking like this morning. We'll check in on that.
3 people are dead, 2 are wounded after a mass shooting at the University of Virginia. This happened late last night. There's a manhunt underway right now for the suspect. The university says he is a student there. David Spunt got to Charlottesville for us. He is live at the University of Virginia. David, what do you know this morning?
Dana, terrible tragedy. As you said, 3 people killed. We're not sure if they're students, waiting to get more information from the university police. 2 injured, but there's a manhunt underway. It happened last night in the 10 o'clock hour behind me Sunday night inside a parking garage here on the campus of University of Virginia. And right now, police are looking for a suspect that they named shortly after the shooting took place. They say his name is Christopher Darnell Jones Jr. We know that he is a student at the University of Virginia. University of Virginia President Jim Ryan confirmed that he's a student. We're told that he was on the football team at some point, at least in 2018. It's not clear if he ever played or the last time he may have played on the football team. And according to authorities, Dana and Bill, he might be driving a black SUV with Virginia tag TWX 3580. Again, Virginia tag TWX 3580. Right now, there is a shelter in place here in Charlottesville at the local elementary schools, at the middle school, the high school. All of the community offices and city offices are closed today. Classes are canceled. People are being told to shelter in place as they look for Christopher Darnell Jones Jr., but certainly a frightening scene. We're waiting for some updates. We're getting updates, Dana and Bill, via social media. We're waiting for some potentially some updates on camera to give us an idea of exactly where police are in their investigation. But right now, there is an active manhunt. 3 people dead, 2 wounded. Dana, Bill?
David Spunt, thank you. We'll be back to you for more updates. Thank you. Bill?
In the meantime, you're watching this over the weekend. Control of the House is still outstanding right now. But late on Sunday, Republicans got some good news in a couple key races, a few of them down here in Arizona, then a few others in California. Here's where the question mark is. This is Arizona 1, okay? So this is east of Phoenix into Scottsdale. The Republican, David Schweiker, hanging on right now to a lead of about 900 votes with an estimated count of 94,000 coming in thus far. Let me pop out here. Juan Ciscomani down here on the border. He too had been trailing, then overtook his challenger on the Democratic side. Your difference is about 1,700 votes there and that. But Republicans are starting to feel good a little bit about these 2 races because of the way they flipped. In California, there's a ton, and bring a lot of patience. This could take several days. Mail-in votes, they arrive on Friday, on Saturday, on Monday, on Tuesday, and they wait to count them up. But here is where Republicans believe that they are hanging in. This is David Valadao. He had voted to impeach, but he is hanging on to this lead. The problem there in this race, here's the margin, 2,800. The problem is that 53%, I've checked it I checked it on Friday, Dana. I checked it on Saturday. I checked it yesterday. This hasn't moved, okay? So we're still waiting on a lot of votes there. In California, 22. I'll show you one other one here. Come forward. This is California 41 here. And this is one that moved toward the Republicans as well. More of the votes been counted, about 3/4, but Calvert has a lead here. Difference of about 4,000 votes. So they are hanging on. Republicans are there. And I'll just show you one more to show you how close these races could be. And in the end, a lot of these really, there could be a recount or they could be separated in this race in California 13 by 84 votes. That's where we are. Let's move across the room right now. I think right now Republicans can get to 218. There's some insiders down in Washington, D.C. who put it at 219 to 222. So we'll see in time who is right.
We will see.
Josh?
Yeah, we have Josh Kroshar. He's Axios senior political correspondent. He's also a Fox News contributor. So, okay, do you think at this moment Republicans are comfortable saying they will have the majority when all of these come in?
Yeah, guys, it's pretty clear Republicans are favored to win the majority. It's going to be a narrow majority, but those developments that Bill was just talking about, two very encouraging signs in Arizona for Republicans, Schweikert and also Siscomani. A lot of those remaining ballots are going to lean Republican. So it's not there's no call yet, but Republicans are feeling better than they did yesterday. And California, boy, we're going to wait some time, as you said, Bill, but that Calvert race, that was one that Republicans were worried about. But that batch of votes that came in overnight is very favorable for Republicans. It's looking like a 7 or 8 seat pickup, 221, 222 in that range. Mm-hmm. But that's a narrow majority, but it is a majority for McCarthy.
So you did deep dives over the weekend, as we all did. What have you concluded about why this broke the way it did?
Well, it's all about independence. And when we talked about the midterms, one of the assumptions that we had was that with the economy the way it was, with people thinking the country was headed in the wrong direction, that independents usually break against the party in power. They narrowly broke for the Democrats. And what voters were saying, these swing voters, they wanted to check the White House, but they also wanted to check the more extreme elements of the Republican Party. And Republicans in these Senate races, they nominated some first-time candidates, some candidates that may be a little bit too far to the right in the states that they were running in, and that cost the Republicans politically in the Senate. And I think that larger brand affected even the House Republicans, where some good candidates in blue areas of the country couldn't quite get across the finish line because they couldn't win enough of that swing vote.
And Republicans did better with Latinos, Asian Americans and Black Americans, but not as much as they thought. But is this, when you look at a political realignment, are these kind of baby steps each election as you get a little bit more of that vote, what you can count on in the future?
They're baby steps. They did better than they did with Hispanics, with Asian Americans in particular from the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. But they also